It's time for another blistering report from the front lines of the cultural war for a constitutional America. And now, here's your host, Charles Benninghoff.
The American taxpayers have been paying for the lion's share of Europe's military defense for the past 25 years. As our own nation approaches bankruptcy and a $20 trillion deficit, we spend almost as much money on the defense for NATO as we do for the defense of America. Congress complains every year that America does not have enough funds for our defense budget. But do you ever hear Congress complaining about how much we give away to European nations every year for their defense budget? Americans should shout out now to Congress and demand that NATO be defunded until the European nations pay the fair share they agreed to pay years ago. We could practically double our defense budget if we cut off the EU Freeloaders, EU standing for the European Union. Or we could use the money to shore up Social Security or fix our crumbling bridges and roads and many, many other infrastructure projects. And yet no one in Congress is talking about defunding NATO or demanding that Europe pay us back for defending its numerous countries with American blood, sweat, tears, and boots on the ground these past 25 years. Today, I'll explain why American taxpayers are being completely ripped off by Europe, and I'll tell you how we can trump NATO. Yes, we can trump NATO. I hope you'll speak out to Congress on this issue, and I'll even tell you how you can do that today in a very easy and economical manner. Believe me, when our network of patriot activists speaks out to Congress, Congress listens. If you think back to Paul Ryan's fake Obamacare repeal, Americans just like you made all the difference in defeating that bill. Don't you think otherwise. It was Americans who did that. The bill sailed through 3 committee hearings in the House, and it was destined to pass, and I thought it was going to pass and be sent on the Senate. But I was surprised at the response of our followers and the other patriots in the United States. Even President Trump was back in the bill, and he tweeted, and I am quoting, "Contact your rep and tell them you support that Ryan Care bill." But according to the Washington Post, communication lines at the House were shut down by people. Instead of supporting it, they were opposing the Ryan bill by an overall margin of 50-1. So just watch the videos on my channel and get mad at Congress. But don't just watch, take action. You can make a big difference, because unless you contact your representative or senator, your wishes will not be heard, and it will be business as usual on Capitol Hill. Our messaging system provides one means for people to speak out and get engaged in the process, as the defeat of Paul Ryan's Obamacare bill clearly demonstrated. We call our messaging system GEMS, the GEMS system, Grassroots Enterprise Message System. It is not an easier way on the face of this planet to message Congress with personalized letters. Now, back to those nasty NATO freeloading nations of Europe. First, let's start with a threat from the European Union Commission President, a guy named Jean-Claude Juncker. The people of Great Britain, you may know, have voted to leave the European Union and become an independent nation once again, rather than an unincorporated county ruled and dominated by the European Union and their bureaucrats like Juncker, and forced to have totally open borders, allowing unknown numbers of refugees, unvetted and otherwise, to come in. The British vote was on a referendum that was nicknamed Brexit, which stood for Britain's exit from the EU. Donald Trump has praised Brexit, as any good American should. What freedom-loving American would not support the right of self-determination for the British people? The European Union Commission hates the Brexit decision by the British people because the EU relies on Britain's economy to help keep its leadership and bureaucrats stocked in big Mercedes Benz autos and caviar. So Jean-Claude Juncker started mouthing off because President Trump had praised Brexit. Take a listen to his threat against America. You won't believe it coming from a leader of the European Union, but it's coming.
A lot of people would like it that way. Even people on another continent. where the newly elected U.S. president was happy that the Brexit was taking place and has asked other countries to do the same. And if he goes on like that, I am going to promote the independence of Ohio and Austin, Texas.
What an arrogant hater of free speech on the part of Trump this guy Juncker is. It's hard not to laugh at him, but where does an unelected dictator from Europe get off threatening the very nation that pays for his country's defense and indeed for the defense of the entire European Union? Juncker's comments just show the arrogance and the sense of entitlement that many of these European bureaucrat leaders have when it comes to your tax dollars. And all these guys running the European Union, they're not elected, they're appointed bureaucrats. They do have a house essentially equivalent to our House of Representatives and that kind of a bureaucracy, but the guys that run it are just government employees. They're not elected. Now, let's talk about NATO, which stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You may remember during World War II, the battle to free Europe was largely a battle of the North Atlantic, the stretch of water running between New York to Boston, all the way across to England and Holland and so forth. That's called the North Atlantic Treaty. That's called the North Atlantic. And so the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was comprised of the nations that were in that defense treaty group, and they include the United States, Canada, the nations of Western Europe. Today, NATO has 29 member nations, and it includes many, many small little itty-bitty European countries like Montenegro. NATO's sole purpose in organizing was to defend against the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. Some people call it as Russia at that time, but that Russia differs greatly from the Russia of today, which is now dominated by communists. And you know, that communist empire, USSR, it broke apart and it collapsed in 1992 because it could not compete with the military defense spending by the United States and the weaponry that we had, as well as the economic power the United States had at that time. In other words, NATO exists to defend against a threat, the USSR, and that threat disappeared 25 years ago. And the United States still pays 75% of NATO's total budget, and it does so every year. The freeloaders in the European Union obviously don't take their own defense seriously, so why should we? Take a look at this chart from the Business Insider. In 2014, all the countries of NATO pledged to pay 2% of their gross domestic product for defense spending in NATO. And that was just a restatement because it had gone back for many years, all the way to the 1990s, when NATO members pledged to and dedicated 2% of their gross domestic product for their own defense in NATO. But as you can see, the United States and Estonia were the only two countries that met that target in 2015. Is that unbelievable? Canada, Italy, and the Netherlands, in fact, paid nothing to NATO. I cannot understand Canada, Italy, and the Netherlands paying nothing. It just is beyond me. These three, now largely socialist nations, should be condemned for not honoring their agreement and either put on a payment plan which they have to honor, or they should be kicked out of NATO and their defense is no longer our issue. Likewise, Great Britain, Germany, and France failed to meet that 2% threshold in spite of having the largest economies in Europe, and they promised numerous times to live up to their 2% obligation. But the American taxpayers, well, we were forced to double up, and we paid 3.6% of our gross domestic product to defend the European Union. Can you believe that? We're paying 3.6%, and the guys over there, the fat cats in their Mercedes and their Rolls Royces, they're barely paying a dime. While we pledged 2% of our GDP to support NATO, we actually paid more than 3%. And as far as Congress is concerned, it seems that the American tax dollar just grows on a great big tree, and they can throw the money all over Europe without even worrying about it. To put that into perspective, America spent $585 billion on NATO defense in 2015, according to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And our own defense budget here at home was $597 billion the same year. 585 for the Europeans, 597 for us. How you like those numbers? You can find links to all these facts and figures on our action page today. Bob Mallory on the final screen will tell you how to get there. But you can go there. You don't have to take my word for these figures. These figures come from reliable, independent sources. You know, we're spending more than $1 trillion every 2 years to defend Europe. And the head of the European Union is threatening to break up the United States? How you reconcile that? I can't. Imagine all the good we could do right here in America if Europe started to pay its fair share. For example, take a look recently at Atlanta, Georgia. Just this morning, the bridge collapsed. 250,000 drivers a day now have to take a detour because the I-85 bridge collapsed because of a fire. We didn't have the money to properly maintain that bridge. It's not quite obvious. Our own country is falling apart, and we're paying $1 trillion every 2 years to defend Europe. That's not billion, that's not million, that's trillion with a T. President Trump says he wants to spend $1 trillion to start patching up our crumbling infrastructure. But the members of Congress are all asking, where could the money possibly come from? Here's an idea. I think you knew I had one. How about if the nations of Europe pay us back for the 25 years worth of defense spending that we've doled out to protect them, that they agreed originally to pay? The nations can either pay up or America will impose economic sanctions against them, nation by nation, until we make up the difference, or in the alternative, just redo NATO to exclude them. Have the money spent for our defense. Let them worry about their defense. Just 2 years' worth of NATO defense payments would pay for President Trump's infrastructure plan or anything else he wanted to spend money on. Can you imagine an extra $1 trillion in our circulation and how much good that would do for America's homeless, educate our kids, help the inner city youth stop murdering each other, give meaning in life and jobs? So here's how you can help. Write your congressman. Go to our action page today and start sending personal letters to Congress, starting with the House Committee on Armed Services. Tell them we want to see legislation immediately drafted to demand that the nations of Europe pay the United States back for 25 years worth of defense spending that they have years and years and years promised to pay in the first place. And demand economic sanctions if any nation of Europe refuses to pay for its own defense. Why should America continue defending Europe from a threat that no longer exists? The USSR is gone. Russia is a mere shadow of its former self. And besides, it's no longer a communist dictatorship. You may not like their form of government that they have now, but they do have elections and they do change people in leadership. So we've got enough problems here at home. And all that money could be used to solve those problems. So get cracking, patriots. Go be an action hero today and speak out to Congress. Bob Mallory will have instructions on the next screen describing how to get to our action page, so stay tuned. This is Charles Benninghoff signing off and wishing you freedom, fulfillment, and God's many, many blessings.
If you're on our action page on our website, use the form next to the video screen to select a program and send personal letters to Congress. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, click the icon appearing now to find the link to our action page, or check the video's description to find the link. Speak out today.